The security alarm screamed through Rosewood Manor at exactly 3:47 a.m., and Mason Sterling knew his life was about to get infinitely more complicated. He stood in his silk pajamas and designer robe, watching the security monitors as a figure in black scaled his supposedly impenetrable fence with the agility of a circus performer. The intruder landed gracefully in his prized rose garden, then did something completely unexpected. They pulled out cleaning supplies from a backpack and began scrubbing his fountain. "What the hell?" Mason muttered, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. In 5 years of living in this fortress-like mansion, he'd dealt with paparazzi, gold diggers, and corporate spies, but never a burglar who broke into. Clean? 20 minutes later, Mason found himself face-to-face with the most peculiar criminal he'd ever encountered. Violet Martinez stood in his marble foyer, still holding a scrub brush, her wild curly hair escaping from a messy bun, and her dark eyes blazing with defiant embarrassment. "Let me get this straight," Mason said, circling her slowly while she stood between two security guards who looked equally bewildered. "You broke into my home, a felony I might add, to clean my fountain because you thought you were supposed to start work today?" "Your assistant said 4 a.m. sharp," Violet shot back, waving the brush for emphasis. "I've been unemployed for 3 months, Mr. Sterling. When someone offers me a job, I show up early to make a good impression." Mason couldn't help himself. He laughed. A real, genuine laugh that echoed through the cavernous foyer. It had been so long since anyone had surprised him that he'd forgotten what it felt like. "My assistant said 4 p.m., Miss Martinez, as in afternoon, as in when normal people conduct business interviews." Violet's face turned the most spectacular shade of crimson Mason had ever seen. She looked down at her black outfit, clearly chosen for stealth rather than professional cleaning, and groaned. "Oh my God, I'm wearing a cat burglar costume to a job interview." She buried her face in her hands. "This is why my mother thinks I need therapy." "The therapy might not be a bad idea," Mason said dryly, then dismissed his security team with a wave. "That'll be all, gentlemen. False alarm." As the guards retreated, Mason studied this unexpected disruption to his carefully ordered life. Violet Martinez was nothing like the parade of desperate housekeepers his assistant usually sent over. She was younger, probably 25, with an artistic edge that showed in her vintage band t-shirt under the black jacket and the paint smudges on her fingers that she'd obviously tried to scrub off. "So," he said, settling into his leather armchair like a king holding court, "tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested for breaking and entering." "Because," Violet said, straightening her shoulders with admirable courage, "I'm the best cleaner you'll ever find. I desperately need this job, and I already made your fountain sparkle better than it has in years." Mason glanced through the window at his fountain, which was indeed gleaming in the morning light. "You did that in 20 minutes? I'm very motivated when facing potential jail time." Despite himself, Mason was intrigued. He'd been through 17 housekeepers in the past year, a record that had earned him a reputation as the most impossible employer in the city. They all quit for the same reasons. He was demanding, particular, and according to his last housekeeper's dramatic exit speech, emotionally unavailable and allergic to human warmth. "You know who I am," Mason said, studying her reaction carefully. "Mason Sterling, tech mogul, youngest billionaire in the state, and according to Forbes magazine, one of the most eligible bachelors in America." Violet's tone was matter-of-fact, unimpressed. "You're also known for being impossible to work for, which is why this job pays triple the normal rate." "And you're willing to work for someone impossible?" "Mr. Sterling, I've worked for a perfectionist wedding planner who made people cry for sport, a restaurant owner who threw plates when the parsley wasn't positioned correctly, and an art gallery director who once fired someone for breathing too loudly near a Monet." Violet crossed her arms. "I think I can handle one moody billionaire." The audacity was breathtaking. Mason couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him like he was just another difficult boss rather than a figure to be intimidated by. "Tell me," he said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, "what makes you think you're qualified to work in a home like this?" "Because," Violet said, her confidence growing, "this isn't just a job for me. It's survival." I'm 3 weeks behind on rent. My art career is currently non-existent, and my pride is already so bruised that working for someone famous for being mean can't possibly make it worse. Mason blinked. In a world where everyone told him what they thought he wanted to hear, her brutal honesty was like a splash of cold water. You're an artist? Was an artist. Now I'm a professional cleaner who apparently moonlights as an accidental criminal. She gestured around the opulent foyer. Look, Mr. Sterling, I know I messed up the timing spectacularly, but I'm here, I'm qualified, and I promise you'll never have an employee more grateful for the opportunity. Mason stood and walked to the massive window overlooking his grounds. The morning sun was painting everything in gold, and for the first time in months he felt genuinely entertained. Mrs. Chen, he called, and his longtime housekeeper appeared instantly. Please prepare the East Wing guest room. Sir? Mrs. Chen looked confused. Miss Martinez will be staying here during her employment. It's a live-in position. Violet's jaw dropped. I'm hired? On probation, Mason clarified, turning back to face her. 1-month trial. You'll maintain the main house, and in return, you'll receive salary, room, board, and the most challenging work experience of your life. Why? Violet asked suspiciously. After I broke into your house and called you moody? Mason's smile was enigmatic. Miss Martinez, I've been bored out of my mind for the past year. You've already provided more entertainment in one morning than most people do in a lifetime. As Mrs. Chen led a stunned Violet toward the East Wing, Mason watched them go with growing anticipation. Something told him that hiring the woman who'd broken into his house to clean his fountain was either the best decision he'd made in years, or the most dangerous. Either way, life was about to get very interesting. Violet Martinez had survived many humiliating moments in her 25 years, but waking up in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment while wearing yesterday's cat burglar outfit definitely topped the list. The East Wing guest room was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Silk curtains, antique furniture, and a bed so comfortable she'd slept like royalty despite her mortifying first day. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Mason's estate stretching endlessly, complete with manicured gardens, a tennis court, and what appeared to be a private lake. This is temporary, she whispered to her reflection in the ornate mirror. Get the job done, save some money, get out before you do something stupid like fall for your impossible boss. A soft knock interrupted her pep talk. Miss Martinez? Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but urgent. Mr. Sterling requests your presence in the main library. Immediately. Violet's stomach dropped. Had he changed his mind about hiring her? She quickly changed into her actual work clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, and followed Mrs. Chen through corridors lined with priceless artwork. The library was a cathedral of books, with shelves reaching up to a painted ceiling that belonged in a museum. Mason stood with his back to the entrance, perfectly dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour, speaking in rapid French to someone on his phone. Oui, je comprends. But the contract clearly states... He turned as they entered and switched seamlessly to English. I'll call you back, Francois. You speak French? Violet asked before she could stop herself. French, Italian, Spanish, Mandarin, and enough Russian to negotiate hostile takeovers. Mason's smile was sharp. Useful skills when you're trying to conquer the world before 30. How modest. I find modesty overrated. He moved to an antique desk covered with papers. We have a problem, Miss Martinez. Here it comes, Violet thought. This was all a mistake speech. My ex-fiancé is arriving in 2 hours. That wasn't what she'd expected. Congratulations, Violet said uncertainly. Mason's laugh was bitter. Hardly. Victoria Ashford is coming to collect her belongings and, more importantly, to assess whether I'm still the heartless workaholic she left me for being. He picked up a crystal paperweight, examining it like it held the secrets of the universe. Apparently, our breakup has been featured in 3 gossip magazines this week, and she's concerned about her public image. Okay, Violet said slowly. And this affects me how? Because, Mason said, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, you're going to help me prove that I'm a changed man. I'm sorry, what? Mason began pacing, and Violet realized this was how he operated. Constant motion like a shark that couldn't stop swimming. Victoria left me because she claimed I was incapable of genuine human connection, said I treated everyone like employees rather than people, that I lived in an ivory tower, completely disconnected from real life. And you want me to help you prove her wrong by pretending to be your girlfriend? Violet crossed her arms. Because I should mention that I'm a terrible actress. Not my girlfriend, Mason said, stopping in front of a Picasso that probably cost more than most people's houses. My friend. Someone who actually enjoys my company, despite my alleged character flaws. We've known each other for exactly 12 hours. And for most of those, I was either breaking into your house or sleeping in your guest room. Details. Mason waved dismissively. The point is, Victoria will expect to find me alone and miserable, surrounded by hired help who are too intimidated to speak to me honestly. Instead, she'll meet you someone who clearly has no problem telling me exactly what she thinks. Violet studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, she saw something unexpected. Vulnerability. For all his wealth and power, Mason Sterling was essentially asking her to help him prove he wasn't the monster his ex-fiancée believed him to be. What's in it for me? She asked. Besides keeping your job? Mason's smile returned. Double salary for the month and... He hesitated as if the next words were difficult. I'll look at your artwork. Give you honest feedback from someone who's collected art for 10 years. Violet's breath caught. She hadn't shown her work to anyone in months, too scared of rejection to even try. You collect art? I own pieces by Rothko, Kandinsky, and Hockney. I have an entire wing devoted to contemporary works. Mason's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Chen mentioned you were painting when you first arrived. Your fingers were covered in acrylics. The fact that he'd noticed such a small detail sent an unexpected warmth through Violet's chest. Fine, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I'm not lying to anyone. If your ex asks about our relationship, I'll tell her the truth. That I work here and we're friendly. Agreed. Second, no weird coupley stuff. I'm not going to hold your hand or gaze lovingly into your eyes. Pity, Mason said with a grin that made her stomach flutter. I have very gazeable eyes. Third, Violet continued, ignoring the flutter. When this is over, we go back to normal boss-employee relations. No awkwardness, no expectations. Define normal, Mason said, moving closer. Because I should warn you, Miss Martinez, normal is rather boring, and I'm discovering I have a strong aversion to boredom. Before Violet could respond, the library doors burst open. A woman swept in like a hurricane in designer heels. Tall, blonde, and absolutely gorgeous in that effortless way that suggested personal trainers and expensive skincare routines. Mason, darling. Victoria Ashford's voice carried the refined accent of someone who'd attended the finest schools. I hope you don't mind. I let myself in. The new security system remembers my fingerprints. Mason's entire demeanor shifted, becoming cooler and more formal. Victoria, you're early. I was in the neighborhood. Victoria's ice blue eyes swept over Violet dismissively before returning to Mason. Who's this? This, Mason said, moving to stand beside Violet with the subtle possessiveness of a man marking his territory. Is Violet Martinez, my friend? Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Friend? Actually, Violet said, stepping forward with a brightness that was only slightly forced. I work here. I'm the new housekeeper. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. How interesting, Victoria said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Mason, you never mentioned that you'd started fraternizing with the help. The casual cruelty of the comment hit Violet like a slap, but before she could respond, Mason's hand found the small of her back, warm, protective, and surprisingly comforting. Violet isn't just the help, he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. She's the most interesting person I've met in years. Unlike some people, she doesn't need a trust fund to be fascinating. Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. How refreshing. I'm sure you two have a lot in common. We do, Violet said, surprised by her own boldness. We both appreciate honesty, for instance. And we both think pretentious people are exhausting. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's smile became positively arctic, and Mason's hand pressed more firmly against Violet's back. Whether in support or warning, she couldn't tell. Well, Victoria said finally, this has been illuminating. Mason, I'll collect my things and be out of your hair shortly. Clearly, you've moved on to newer interests. As Victoria clicked out of the library on her stiletto heels, Violet realized two things. First, she'd just made a very powerful enemy, and second, the way Mason was looking at her suggested their fake friendship might be becoming dangerously real. That, Mason said softly, was magnificent. That, Violet replied, her heart pounding, was probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. Maybe, Mason agreed, his gray eyes sparkling with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. But it was also the most fun I've had in months. As footsteps echoed from the floor above, Victoria collecting her belongings with what sounded like unnecessary force, Violet wondered if she'd just stepped into the adventure of a lifetime or signed up for complete disaster. Knowing her luck, it was probably both. The crash that echoed through Rosewood Manor at 2 p.m. was spectacular enough to make the chandelier incident from Violet's nightmares seem like a gentle breeze. She stood in Mason's private art gallery, surrounded by what appeared to be the remains of a very expensive sculpture, while classical music played mockingly from hidden speakers. Please tell me, Mason's voice came from behind her, deadly calm, that you didn't just destroy my original Rodin. Violet turned slowly, a feather duster still clutched in her trembling hand. Mason stood in the doorway wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. His expression was unreadable, which somehow made everything worse. Technically, Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper, I didn't destroy it. Victoria did. Come again? She was here 20 minutes ago looking for her jewelry box. Said she'd left it in the gallery. Violet gestured helplessly at the bronze fragments scattered across the marble floor. She was examining the sculpture when I came into dust, and she knocked it over while dramatically gesturing about how you'd clearly replaced her with someone beneath your station. Mason's jaw tightened. And where is Victoria now? Gone. She took her jewelry box and left, but not before suggesting that I was obviously trying to seduce you for your money and that I should know my place. Violet's cheeks flushed with remembered anger. I may have told her that my place was anywhere I damn well pleased to be. Despite the destruction around them, Mason's lips twitched. You told Victoria Ashford to go to hell? Not in those exact words. I was more creative with my vocabulary. Christ, Violet. Mason ran a hand through his dark hair, and she couldn't help but notice how the afternoon light streaming through the gallery windows made his gray eyes look almost silver. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ruined a priceless sculpture and probably my career? You've made me fall a little bit in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Violet's heart stopped, restarted, then began beating so fast she wondered if he could hear it. That's not funny, she managed. I'm not joking. Mason stepped closer, crunching over bronze fragments. Do you know how long it's been since someone defended me? Since someone got angry on my behalf? I wasn't defending you, Violet said quickly, backing up until she hit the wall. I was defending myself. She was incredibly rude. She was rude because she's jealous. Mason braced one hand against the wall beside her head, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her think of midnight and dangerous decisions. Victoria's never had to fight for anything in her life but you. You fight for everything, don't you? I have to, Violet whispered. No one else is going to do it for me. That's where you're wrong. Mason's voice was soft, intimate. I'm going to fight for you, Violet Martinez, starting right now. Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Mason stepped back just as Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, took one look at the destruction, and sighed deeply. "Sir, there's been a development," she said, pointedly ignoring the bronze debris. "Miss Ashford has called the press. There are photographers gathering at the front gate." Mason's expression darkened. "What did she tell them?" "According to the preliminary reports, she's claiming that you've had a complete breakdown, that you're living in squalor with a, and I quote, unstable woman who destroyed priceless art in a jealous rage." Violet felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh no. Oh no, this is going to be everywhere. My mother is going to see this on the news and have a heart attack." "Your mother watches entertainment news?" Mason asked. "My mother watches everything. She's going to think I've joined some kind of rich person cult." Violet slumped against the wall. "I'm going to be known as the crazy housekeeper who seduced a billionaire and destroyed art. This is worse than the time I accidentally set fire to my high school chemistry lab." "You set fire to a chemistry lab?" "Focus, Mason. There are paparazzi outside your house because of me." Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, the same predatory smile she'd seen on their first morning. "Mrs. Chen, please call my stylist and tell her we need 2 outfits for a formal event. Something that will photograph beautifully." "Sir?" "We're going to give the press exactly what they want, a story, but it's going to be our story, not Victoria's." Violet stared at him. "Have you lost your mind? I can't handle photographers. I once hid in a bathroom for an hour because a food blogger wanted to take my picture at a restaurant opening." "You won't be handling them," Mason said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I will. All you have to do is look stunning and let me show the world exactly what kind of woman has captured Mason Sterling's attention." "But I haven't captured..." "Haven't you?" Mason stepped closer again, and this time Violet didn't back away. "You broke into my house, destroyed my chandelier, told off my ex-fiancé, and now you've created the most interesting scandal I've been involved in for years. If that's not capturing someone's attention, I don't know what is." 2 hours later, Violet found herself in a designer dress that probably cost more than her car, standing in front of a full-length mirror while a professional makeup artist added finishing touches to what she had to admit was a dramatic transformation. The dress was midnight blue silk that hugged her curves and made her look like she belonged in Mason's world. Her wild curls had been tamed into an elegant updo, and the makeup artist had somehow made her look like a mysterious movie star, rather than a woman who cleaned houses for a living. "You look incredible," Mason said from the doorway, and his voice carried a note of genuine admiration that made her stomach flutter. He looked pretty incredible himself in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. Together, they looked like they'd stepped off the pages of a high society magazine. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Violet admitted. "Good," Mason said, offering her his arm, "because we're about to put on the performance of our lives." The front lawn of Rosewood Manor had been transformed into a media circus. Dozens of photographers and reporters crowded behind the wrought iron gates, cameras flashing like lightning. Violet's knees went weak at the sight. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can." Mason's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Just remember, you're not Violet the housekeeper right now. You're Violet, the woman who made Mason Sterling believe in love again." "But that's not, isn't it?" Mason stopped walking and turned to face her completely. "Violet, in 3 days you've turned my entire world upside down. You've made me laugh, made me angry, made me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. If that's not love, it's certainly the closest thing to it I've experienced in years." The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. This wasn't part of the act. This was real. "Mason, I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "I know we barely know each other, and I know I'm probably the last person you expected to have feelings for. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just about helping me save face with Victoria." The camera flashes beyond the gate seemed to intensify, as if the photographers could sense the drama unfolding. Violet looked into Mason's eyes and saw vulnerability, hope, and something that looked very much like love. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay? Okay, let's give them a story they'll never forget." Mason's smile was radiant. "Are you ready, Miss Martinez?" "Ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Sterling." As they walked toward the gates together, Violet realized that somewhere between breaking into his house and destroying priceless art, she'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Mason Sterling. The photographer's questions, the flashing cameras, Victoria's vindictive schemes, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the way Mason's hand felt in hers, strong and sure and promising a future she'd never dared to dream of. The show was about to begin, but for the first time in her life, Violet Martinez felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The camera flashes were blinding, but Violet had never felt more alive. Standing beside Mason in front of Rosewood Manor's ornate gates, she watched him transform into the confident, charismatic businessman the world knew. Except this time, there was something different in his eyes, something real. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling!" the reporters shouted over each other. "Is it true you've had a breakdown? What can you tell us about the destroyed artwork?" Mason raised his hand and the crowd fell silent with the kind of respect that only immense wealth could command. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "Ladies and gentlemen, I call this impromptu press conference to address the ridiculous rumors circulating about my personal life." His arm tightened around Violet's waist, pulling her closer. "I'd like you to meet Violet Martinez, artist, intellectual, and the woman who's completely changed my perspective on what matters in life." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Sterling, is it true that Ms. Martinez is your housekeeper, and that she destroyed a priceless sculpture in a fit of jealous rage?" Violet felt her cheeks burn, but Mason's chuckle was warm and genuine. "Violet is many things. Talented, brilliant, absolutely fearless, but jealous isn't one of them." His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her forget about the cameras entirely. "As for the sculpture, accidents happen when you're passionate about life. I'd rather live with someone who feels deeply than someone who treats everything like a museum piece." The jab at Victoria was subtle but unmistakable. Several reporters exchanged knowing glances. "But the reports suggest," another journalist began. "The reports," Mason interrupted smoothly, "are being spread by someone who clearly can't accept that I've moved on to something infinitely better." His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Violet represents everything I've been missing: authenticity, passion, and the courage to speak her mind regardless of the consequences." "Ms. Martinez," a photographer called out, "how do you respond to critics who say you're a gold digger taking advantage of Mr. Sterling's vulnerability?" For a moment, Violet's old insecurities flared. The voice in her head that had always whispered she wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. But then she felt Mason's hand squeeze hers, and she remembered who she'd become over the past 3 days. Someone brave enough to break into a mansion, strong enough to stand up to Victoria Ashford, and bold enough to fall in love with a man who could have anyone. "I'd say," Violet spoke into the microphone Mason offered her, her voice steady and clear, "that anyone who thinks love is about money has never experienced the real thing. Mason could lose every penny tomorrow and I'd still choose him, because he's the first person who's ever seen me exactly as I am and decided that was enough." The reporters erupted in a frenzy of questions, but Violet only had eyes for Mason. His expression was one of pure wonder, as if she'd just given him the most precious gift imaginable. "Any plans for marriage?" someone shouted. Mason's grin was mischievous. "Ask me again in a few months when I've convinced her I'm worth the trouble." As the press conference continued, Violet found herself relaxing into the role. Not the role of fake girlfriend, but the role of woman in love, because that's exactly what she was. The cameras captured every smile, every gentle touch, every moment of genuine affection between them. 20 minutes later, they escaped back into the mansion, leaving the reporters to file their stories. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the foyer with a tablet, her expression unreadable. "Sir, the early online reports are already going live." Mason took the tablet and Violet peered over his shoulder as he scrolled through headlines. "Sterling's stunning transformation. Billionaire's new love changes everything." From heartless to smitten, inside Mason Sterling's greatest merger yet. The housekeeper who captured a heart, Violet Martinez's fairy tale romance. "Not bad," Mason said, handing the tablet back. Though I particularly enjoy being called heartless to smitten. Your publicist is calling, Mrs. Chen added. She says the phone hasn't stopped ringing. 3 magazine covers want exclusive interviews and there's already talk of a documentary. Violet felt suddenly overwhelmed. This is insane. 3 days ago I was eating ramen noodles for dinner and avoiding my landlord. Now I'm trending on social media? Welcome to my world, Mason said softly. Though I have to admit, it's considerably more interesting with you in it. Before Violet could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID made her groan out loud. My mother, she explained, then answered with forced cheer. Hi, Mom. Violet Maria Martinez. Her mother's voice was loud enough for Mason to hear every word. I just saw you on the news. You're dating a billionaire and you didn't tell me? I had to learn from Mrs. Rodriguez next door that my daughter is now famous. Mom, I can explain. Explain. Mija, you've been cleaning his house. Is this why you took that job? Were you planning this the whole time? Mason stepped closer, speaking loud enough for the phone to pick up. Mrs. Martinez, this is Mason Sterling. I just wanted you to know that your daughter is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. And I consider myself incredibly lucky that she took that cleaning job. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You're really him? Violet's mother whispered. The man from the magazines? I'm really him. And Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that Violet has never once asked me for anything except the chance to work hard and prove herself. Your daughter is extraordinary. When Violet's mother spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. You take good care of my baby, okay? She's special. I know she is, Mason said, his eyes never leaving Violet's face. I promise you, she's in very good hands. After Violet hung up, they stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The magnitude of what had just happened, the press conference, the headlines, the very public declaration of their feelings, was starting to sink in. So, Violet said finally, what happens now? Now, Mason said, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. We figure out how to navigate this together. The real relationship, not the performance. And if it doesn't work out, if this is all just adrenaline and proximity and the excitement of scandal? Mason's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Then we'll deal with that too. But Violet, what I feel for you isn't about adrenaline or proximity. It's about the way you make me want to be better than I am. It's about how you see the world, like it's full of possibilities instead of problems. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Good, Mason said, leaning his forehead against hers. I'm terrified. But I'd rather be terrified with you than bored without you. Just then, Mrs. Chen cleared her throat delicately. Sir? Miss Ashford is at the gate again. She's not happy about the press conference. Mason and Violet exchanged glances. Through the window, they could see Victoria's red sports car parked aggressively close to the gate, and even from a distance, her body language screamed fury. Round 2? Violet asked. Round 2, Mason confirmed. Though I should warn you, Victoria doesn't lose gracefully. Neither do I, Violet said, surprising herself with her own confidence. As they walked toward the front door together, Violet realized that somewhere between the camera flashes and the heartfelt confessions, she'd stopped being afraid of Victoria Ashford, the media, or even the possibility of heartbreak. She was Violet Martinez, the woman who'd broken into a billionaire's house and accidentally stolen his heart. And she was ready for whatever came next. Victoria Ashford stood in the marble foyer of Rosewood Manor like a storm system in Chanel, her ice-blue eyes crackling with the kind of fury that had once made Fortune 500 CEOs weep. She'd somehow bypassed security, again, and now faced Mason and Violet with the predatory grace of a woman who'd never been denied anything in her life. That, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut crystal, was quite the performance this afternoon. I particularly enjoyed the part where you told the entire world that I'm a bitter ex-fiancé who can't accept rejection. I never mentioned you by name, Mason replied coolly, though Violet noticed his hand instinctively move to the small of her back, protective and possessive. You didn't need to. Victoria's laugh was like broken glass. The implications were crystal clear. But here's what your little press conference failed to mention, darling. I have receipts. She pulled out her phone with theatrical flair, and Violet's stomach dropped to her designer shoes. Receipts? Mason's voice carried a dangerous undertone. Security footage from 3 days ago. Your new soulmate breaking into your home like a common criminal. The timestamp shows 3:47 a.m., Mason. What do you think the press would make of that romantic detail? Violet felt the blood drain from her face. Of course, Victoria had thought of this. Of course, she'd find a way to turn Violet's embarrassing mistake into a weapon. They'd think it was romantic, Violet said, her voice steadier than she felt. A woman so eager to start her new job that she showed up 12 hours early. The press loves a good work ethic story. Victoria's smile was predatory. Oh, my dear, naive little housekeeper. They'd think you're an unhinged stalker who manipulated a vulnerable man during a difficult time in his life. Especially when they learn about your mounting debts, your failed art career, and your rather desperate circumstances. How do you know about... Violet began. I made some calls, Victoria said with a shrug. Amazing what private investigators can discover in 48 hours. Did you know she was evicted from her last apartment, Mason? That she's been living on credit cards and ramen noodles for months? Rather convenient timing for her to suddenly fall in love with a billionaire, don't you think? Mason stepped forward, and Violet had never seen him look so coldly furious. Get out. I'm not finished, Victoria continued, clearly enjoying herself. Because the best part isn't even the break-in or the financial desperation. It's the artwork. She pulled up another photo on her phone, a picture of Violet's paintings from her old apartment taken through a window with a telephoto lens. Your girlfriend's art, Mason. Take a look. Mason glanced at the phone, and Violet watched his expression change. Her heart shattered as she saw confusion, then something that looked suspiciously like recognition cross his features. Those paintings, he said slowly, look familiar? Victoria's voice was triumphant. They should. They're copies, Mason. Remarkably good copies of pieces from your private collection. Pieces that have never been photographed or displayed publicly. Which means your dear Violet has been in your home before, studying your art, planning this entire seduction. The silence that followed was deafening. Violet felt like she was drowning, watching everything she'd built with Mason crumble around her. That's not... She began desperately. Isn't it? Victoria pressed. Tell me, when exactly did you first see Mason's collection? Before or after you decided to pursue employment here? Violet's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Because the truth was complicated, messy, and would sound exactly like what Victoria was suggesting. Violet's voice cracked. I worked for your interior designer last year, Patricia Whitmore. I helped install some pieces in the guest wing while you were in Europe. I saw the paintings then, and I loved them so much that I tried to recreate them from memory. It wasn't about money or seduction or any of this, They were beautiful. Mason's face had gone completely blank. The same expression he'd worn during their first meeting, before she'd made him laugh, before she'd made him fall in love with her. You were in my house before, he said quietly. You knew who I was when you applied for the job. Yes, but you lied to me. I didn't lie. I just didn't mention... You didn't mention that you'd been fantasizing about my life, my home, my possessions for an entire year? Mason's voice was deadly calm. That this whole accidental meeting was actually a carefully planned infiltration. It wasn't like that. Violet's voice rose desperately. Yes, I remembered your house, and yes, I was curious about you after installing those paintings. But I never planned any of this. The job posting appeared on my phone randomly, and I was desperate enough to apply. The break-in was a genuine mistake. I really did misunderstand the time. Victoria's smile was triumphant. How wonderfully convenient. The desperate artist with an obsession just happened to accidentally break into the home of the man whose artwork she'd been copying. What are the odds? Mason looked between them, and Violet could see him calculating, analyzing, trying to separate truth from manipulation. It was exactly what Victoria wanted, to poison the pure, simple thing that had grown between them with doubt and suspicion. "Mason," Violet said, her voice breaking, "please, you know me. You know who I am when I'm with you. None of this changes what we feel for each other." "Doesn't it?" he asked, and the distance in his voice was like a knife through her heart. "How do I know what's real? How do I know you didn't plan every moment, every laugh, every touch?" "Because," Violet said, tears threatening to spill over, "I'm not that good an actress. And because the woman who destroyed your sculpture in a fit of protective rage isn't someone calculating enough to plan an elaborate seduction. I'm messy, Mason. I'm impulsive and emotional, and I make terrible decisions when I'm passionate about something. That's not the profile of a master manipulator." For a moment, something flickered in Mason's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or remembered affection. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Oh, but the best part is yet to come," she said, pulling up one final photo. "Because yesterday, while you two were playing house, Violet received a very interesting phone call from the Pemberton Gallery. They want to offer her a solo exhibition, contingent, of course, on her high-profile romantic relationship, generating sufficient media attention." Violet's world tilted sideways. "How did you—" "I told you, darling. I made calls. Amazing how quickly people will sell information when the price is right." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "So tell me, Violet, was the exhibition offer before or after you fell in love? Because it seems awfully coincidental that your art career is suddenly taking off just as you've captured Mason's heart." Mason turned to look at Violet, and she could see everything they'd built together crumbling in his eyes. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Violet felt trapped, cornered by the truth that sounded so much worse than it was. "They did call, yesterday morning. But Mason, I swear to you, I didn't even consider. You didn't consider mentioning it to me." "I was going to. But then Victoria showed up, and the press conference happened, and everything moved so fast. The exhibition, it doesn't matter. I was going to turn it down." "Were you?" Victoria asked sweetly. "Because according to my source at the gallery, you scheduled a meeting for next week to discuss the terms." Violet closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in around her. Because that was true too. She had scheduled the meeting, had allowed herself 5 minutes of hope before remembering that accepting would make everything between her and Mason feel fake. When she opened her eyes, Mason was looking at her like she was a stranger. "I need you to leave," he said quietly. "Mason, please. Both of you," he continued, his voice hollow. "I need to think." Victoria gathered her purse with satisfied efficiency. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. I'll be at the Ritz-Carlton if you want to discuss what happens next with the media. We'll need to control the narrative before this gets out of hand." As Victoria clicked toward the door on her designer heels, she paused beside Violet. "Nothing personal, dear," she murmured. "But you were never going to win this game. You don't even know the rules." When the door closed behind Victoria, the silence was suffocating. Mason stood with his back to Violet, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Mason," she whispered. "How much of it was real?" he asked without turning around. "All of it," she said desperately. "Every moment, every feeling, every word I said to you was real. Yes, I'd seen your house before. Yes, I knew who you were. But I never planned any of this. How could I plan falling in love with you?" "Love," Mason repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. "How do I know that's real either?" "Because," Violet said, her heart breaking with every word, "I'm about to walk away from the best thing that's ever happened to me rather than let you doubt it for one more second." She turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling like agony. At the threshold, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said without looking back, "the paintings I copied weren't about the money they might be worth or the status they represented. They were about the way they made me feel, like beauty was possible even in the darkest moments. That's what you showed me too, Mason. That's what was real." The door closed behind her with the soft finality of a dream ending, leaving Mason alone in his perfect empty house, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 weeks later, Mason Sterling stood in his pristine library, surrounded by the kind of silence that money couldn't buy and success couldn't fill. The morning newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, headlines about his return to bachelorhood and Victoria's gracious reconciliation attempts, but he couldn't focus on a single word. The house felt like a mausoleum without Violet's chaotic energy bringing it to life. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a silver tray, her expression diplomatically neutral. "Your morning coffee, sir," and this arrived by courier. She handed him an elegant invitation that made his stomach clench. The Pemberton Gallery was hosting its newest exhibition tonight, Emerging Voices, The Art of Violet Martinez. She'd taken the exhibition after all. "Sir," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "perhaps you should—" "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen." Mason's voice was sharp enough to end the conversation, but the older woman had been with his family for 30 years and wasn't easily deterred. "With respect, sir, you haven't been fine since Miss Martinez left. You've been existing." She paused at the doorway. "There's a difference." After she left, Mason stared at the invitation until the elegant script blurred. He'd thrown away the most genuine thing in his life, because Victoria had weaponized his deepest fear, that anyone who claimed to love him was really after his money. But 3 weeks of investigation by his best private detectives had revealed the truth. Every one of Victoria's implications had been technically accurate but deliberately misleading. Violet had worked for Patricia Whitmore exactly once, installing 2 paintings in his guest wing while he was in London. She'd copied his artwork because she'd been moved by their beauty, not because she'd planned some elaborate seduction. The gallery had reached out to her after seeing her name in the headlines, not before. And most importantly, she'd turned down the exhibition 3 times before finally accepting it yesterday, long after he'd already broken her heart. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner. "Saw the exhibition announcement. You're an idiot if you don't go tonight. James." Mason's assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Sir, I have Miss Ashford on line 1. She says it's urgent. Tell Victoria I'm not—" "Actually, sir, you might want to take this call." Something in her tone made Mason reach for the phone. "What do you want, Victoria?" "To apologize." Her voice was different, smaller, less confident. "Mason, I need to tell you something about the night Violet left." "I'm listening." "I may have embellished some details about her motivations." Victoria's admission came out in a rush. "The gallery didn't contact her until after your press conference, exactly like she said. And the investigation I hired found no evidence that she'd planned any of this. She really was just a woman who needed a job and accidentally broke into the wrong house at the wrong time." Mason's grip tightened on the phone. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've spent 3 weeks watching you be miserable, and frankly, it's exhausting. You were never this interesting when we were together." Victoria's laugh was rueful. "And because I realized that destroying her didn't make you come back to me. It just made you hate yourself for letting me manipulate you again." The line went quiet for a long moment. "Victoria," Mason said finally, "why did you really break up with me?" "Because you never looked at me the way you looked at her that day in the library," Victoria admitted quietly. "Like I was the most fascinating thing in your universe. I thought if I couldn't have that, no one should. I was wrong." After hanging up, Mason sat in his chair for exactly 3 minutes, then sprang into action with the focused intensity that had made him a billionaire by 30. The Pemberton Gallery was packed with New York's art elite, champagne glasses catching the light as guests moved between displays of Violet's work. Mason arrived fashionably late, wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit that matched the dress she'd worn to their press conference. He found her in the center of the main gallery, surrounded by admirers but looking completely overwhelmed. She wore a simple black dress that made her look sophisticated and artistic, her wild curls tamed into an elegant side bun. But her eyes, those expressive dark eyes that had captivated him from the beginning, looked tired and guarded. Their gazes met across the crowded room, and the conversations around them seemed to fade into background noise. Violet's face went pale, then flushed pink, and Mason felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. He moved through the crowd with the single-minded determination of a man on a mission, ignoring the whispered conversations and curious stares that followed him. "Hello, Violet." "Mason." Her voice was carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I needed to see your work," he said, gesturing to the paintings surrounding them. "The pieces you've been hiding from me." For the first time since he'd arrived, Violet smiled, a real, if tentative, smile. "What do you think?" Mason looked around the gallery with the eye of a serious collector. Violet's paintings were extraordinary, bold, emotional, alive in a way that made his carefully curated collection seem sterile by comparison. But it was the centerpiece that took his breath away. A massive canvas dominated by grays and blues, with a single figure standing in a doorway, light streaming around them like hope. "That one," he said, pointing to the centerpiece. "Tell me about that one." Violet followed his gaze, and her cheeks flushed deeper. "It's called Breaking and Entering. It's about taking risks, about the moment when you decide to step through a door even when you're terrified of what you'll find on the other side." "And what did you find?" "Everything I was looking for," she said quietly. "And everything I was afraid to lose." Mason stepped closer, close enough to smell her familiar perfume, something floral and warm that made him think of lazy Sunday mornings and possibilities. "Violet, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." "Mason, let me finish," he said gently. "I let my past make me suspicious of your present. I let Victoria's manipulation turn me into the exact kind of man you never deserved, someone who questioned your motives instead of trusting your heart." Tears gathered in Violet's eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "You had every right to question things. The timing, the coincidences. It all looked suspicious." "No," Mason said firmly. "What it looked like was a woman brave enough to take a chance on a difficult man, and smart enough to fall in love with him despite his flaws. I should have trusted that. I should have trusted you." Around them, the gallery crowd was pretending not to eavesdrop while hanging on every word. Mason didn't care. He'd learned that some moments were too important for privacy. "I love you, Violet Martinez," he said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I love your courage, your passion, your terrible timing, and your extraordinary heart. I love that you broke into my house and turned my entire life upside down. And I'm hoping, desperately hoping, that you'll give me another chance to prove I'm worthy of the love you offered me." The gallery had gone completely silent. Violet stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Mason," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "I'm making a grand romantic gesture in front of half of New York's art establishment," he said with a grin that felt like sunshine after weeks of storms. "I figured if we were going to be a public spectacle, we might as well make it spectacular." "You're insane," Violet said, but she was smiling now, the brilliant, uninhibited smile that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "Insanely in love with you," Mason corrected. "Violet, will you come home? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that what we have is real?" For a moment that felt like eternity. Violet just looked at him. Then she launched herself into his arms with the same reckless abandon she'd shown that first morning, and Mason caught her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do exactly that. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. But I have conditions." "Name them," Mason said, spinning her around while the gallery erupted in applause. "First, no more letting ex-fiancés manipulate us with half-truths and jealousy." "Agreed. Victoria and I had a very enlightening conversation this afternoon, actually." "Second, I'm keeping the exhibition. I worked too hard to let fear ruin this opportunity. I wouldn't dream of asking you to give it up. In fact, I'd like to commission a piece for the foyer at Rosewood Manor." "And third," Violet said, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "you're buying me dinner after this, somewhere expensive. I've been living on ramen again, and I have sophisticated tastes now." Mason's laugh was rich and warm and full of joy. Violet Martinez, I will buy you dinner every night for the rest of our lives if you'll let me. As they kissed in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her art and his heart laid bare for everyone to see, Mason realized that sometimes the best things in life really did come from the most unexpected places. He'd thought love was about finding someone who fit perfectly into his carefully controlled world. Instead, he'd found someone brave enough to break in and rearrange everything. Someone who'd shown him that the most beautiful art, like the most beautiful love, was a little chaotic, completely authentic, and absolutely worth the risk. 6 months later, the society pages would feature photos of their wedding at Rosewood Manor, with Violet's art hanging throughout the reception and Mason's genuine smile in every frame. But tonight, in a gallery full of strangers who'd become witnesses to their love story, they were just two people who'd found their masterpiece in each other. And they lived happily, passionately, and beautifully ever after.